If you're enjoying this video, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell. Share it with your friends, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Every like and subscribe helps the channel grow. My name is Michael Thompson, and I've been a park ranger here at Redwood Grove for the past 2 years. At 42, you'd think I'd have life figured out. But the truth is, I came here running from my memories, both from the war and from losing Sarah, my wife, to polio. The towering redwoods have been my only real companion since then. These ancient giants, some over 1,000 years old, stand like silent guardians in the Northern California mist. Sometimes, when I'm doing my morning rounds, I talk to them. Sounds crazy, I know, but after what I saw in the war as a combat medic, talking to trees seems pretty normal. This summer has been different though. The drought has made everything crispy and brown, except for these old redwoods. They're tough. They've survived worse. But something isn't right in the forest. I can feel it in my bones. The same way I used to sense danger coming in the war. It started with the Miller's farm last month. Their sheep were found torn apart, but not like a mountain lion or bear would do it. The animals were wrong somehow. Then the Watsons lost 3 cows the same way. The local Native American tribe, the people I've come to know and respect, started hanging protective charms on the trees. They warned people to stay away from certain groves, especially at sunset. I didn't pay much attention at first. 20 years of seeing the worst of humanity in the war had made me skeptical of ghost stories. But then the fire started. Strange ones that would appear and vanish, like someone flicking a switch. I'd find circles of burnt ground with no explanation for how they started or why they stopped. Last week, I was drinking my morning coffee on my cabin porch, watching the sunrise filter through the redwoods, when I got the call about 3 missing hikers. Something in my gut told me this wasn't going to be a normal search and rescue. I checked my gear, strapped on my old service pistol, something I rarely do, and headed out into the forest. I didn't know it then, but that morning would be the last time I'd see my own shadow falling normal and dark against the forest floor. Looking back, I should have noticed how the shadows seemed to move wrong that day, how they stretched a little too long, reached a little too far, but hindsight's always clearer, isn't it? Especially when you're about to face something that shouldn't exist in any sane person's world. The first thing I noticed at the hiker's campsite was the silence. No birds, no squirrels, not even insects. In 20 years of working these woods, I'd never heard them so quiet. Their tent was ripped to shreds, sleeping bags torn apart like paper, but there was no blood, just their stuff scattered everywhere. As if something had been looking for something, I knelt down to examine the ground, using the tracking skills I'd learned over the years. That's when I saw them. Footprints unlike anything I'd ever seen before. They started normal enough. 3 sets of hiking boots. But then they changed. The prints went up the side of a redwood tree, as if someone had just walked straight up the trunk. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I was seeing things. But no, there they were, clear as day. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing through the trees. "This is Ranger Thompson. Is anyone there?" The only answer was my own voice bouncing back at me. But wait, something wasn't right about that echo. It came a second too late. And the voice, it sounded different, almost like someone trying to copy how I spoke. As I moved deeper into the grove, I found something that made my blood run cold. On a smooth rock face, partially hidden behind moss, were ancient cave paintings. I'd seen Native American art before, but this was different. The figure in the paintings was tall and thin, with too many arms and legs, like a shadow that had been stretched out of shape. Around it were smaller figures, human figures, their own shadows seeming to be pulled away from them. That's when I noticed the birds. Dozens of them lay scattered around the rock, perfectly intact but completely lifeless. Below each one was something impossible. Their shadows seemed burned into the ground, like permanent stains on the earth. But the shadows, they were all pointing in different directions, as if the sun had been shining from multiple places at once. My hand unconsciously moved to my pistol. The late afternoon sun was starting to sink, making the shadows between the trees grow longer. And was it my imagination? Or were those shadows moving even when the branches above stayed still? I took out my radio to call for backup, but all I got was static and something else, a sound that made the hair on my neck stand up. Through the static, I heard voices, not just any voices, but the missing hikers, calling for help. They seemed to be coming from deeper in the forest, where the redwoods grew so thick that permanent twilight ruled even in midday. Common sense told me to wait for backup, but those voices, if there was even a chance those hikers were alive, I checked my flashlight, took a deep breath, and headed into the darkness. I didn't know then that I was walking straight into a trap, one that had been waiting for centuries. I followed the voices deeper into the forest, my flashlight beam cutting through the growing darkness. The voices kept changing. Sometimes they sounded like the hikers calling for help, other times like whispers just at the edge of hearing. Something wasn't right about them. They sounded hollow, like an echo in an empty room. Keep it together, Thompson, I muttered to myself, trying to stay calm, like I'd learned in the war. But this was different from anything I'd faced before. Suddenly, my flashlight caught something moving between the trees. It was quick, just a flash of something tall and dark. I spun around, but it was gone. Then I saw it again, this time on my left. It seemed to flow from one shadow to another, like water running downhill. I needed answers. I remembered old Joe from the local tribe had warned me about these woods. I decided to head to his place, keeping to the open spaces where shadows couldn't hide. The sun was setting now, painting the sky orange through the redwood branches. Joe was waiting on his porch, as if he knew I was coming. His weathered face looked grave as I told him what I'd found. "We call it the Shadow Walker," he said quietly, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. "It's always been here, in the deep woods, but something changed it, made it angry, when they tested those nuclear bombs in Nevada. The old spirits got twisted. Now it hunts, collecting shadows, growing stronger with each one it takes. But that's impossible," I said, even though I'd seen things today that were supposed to be impossible. Joe shook his head. "Look at your own shadow." "Ranger," I did. And for a moment, just a moment, I saw it move differently from how I moved, like it was trying to pull away from me. "It's hunting those hikers," Joe continued, "but they're probably already gone. Their shadows taken. Their bodies left empty." As if to prove his point, we heard screaming from the forest. But these weren't cries for help anymore. They were the sounds of people who had seen something their minds couldn't handle. I stood up, checking my gun. I have to try to help them. If you go out there now, as the sun sets, you're walking into its killing ground. Joe warned, "But if you must go, take this." He handed me an old oil lamp. "It doesn't just eat shadows, it fears its own. Light makes more shadows. But fire makes shadows dance. Remember that." I took the lamp, not fully understanding, but grateful for any help. As I headed back into the forest, the sun was just a red line on the horizon. The shadows were long now, stretching like fingers across the ground. And somewhere in those shadows, Something was waiting, but I had a job to do. Those hikers, if there was even a small chance they were still alive, needed help. As I walked into the darkening woods, I could have sworn I saw my shadow wave goodbye to me. Even though I hadn't moved my hand, the deeper I went into the forest. The colder it got, Joe's oil lamp swung from my belt, casting dancing shadows that seemed to move a bit too much. My flashlight beam caught something ahead, a massive redwood, bigger than any I'd seen before. Its trunk was hollow, like a cave reaching up into darkness. That's when I saw them, shadows moving on the tree's surface. But they weren't tree shadows. They were people-shaped, hundreds of them, flowing across the bark like a dark river. And in those shadows, I recognized faces, the missing hikers, farmers from town, and others I didn't know. Some looked ancient, like they'd been there for centuries. Help! Help us! The voices came from everywhere and nowhere. My hand shook as I raised the flashlight. Something moved in the hollow of the tree, something tall and wrong. It unfolded itself like a paper being smoothed out, growing taller and taller. Where its face should have been, there was just darkness. But I could feel it watching me. I backed away slowly, remembering my training. Stay calm, think clearly. But how do you fight a shadow? That's when it struck. One moment it was by the tree. The next it was right beside me, moving faster than any living thing should. I felt a cold so deep it burned as one of its limbs. There were too many to count. Reached for me. I fired my gun. The bullets went right through it, like shooting at smoke. It made a sound then, not a roar or a scream, but like the whisper of dead leaves being crushed. I ran, not my proudest moment, but sometimes running is the smart choice. I could feel it chasing me, sliding from shadow to shadow. My own shadow kept trying to pull away from my feet, like it was being tugged by an invisible rope. Then I remembered Joe's words. Fire makes shadows dance. I stopped, running. The oil lamp bounced against my hip. I had an idea, a crazy one. But when you're being chased by a shadow monster, crazy might be all you've got. The creature circled me, growing larger, its stolen shadows swirling around it like a dark cape. In the fading light, I could see all the shadows it had taken, all the lives it had consumed, stretching and twisting together. You want my shadow? I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. Come and get it. I took out the oil lamp and looked at the massive hollow redwood behind the creature. If I was right about what was in there, and if I timed this perfectly, I might have a chance. If I was wrong, well, I'd be joining all those other shadows swirling around in its dark collection. The sun was almost gone now. It was now or never. The shadow walker reared up, reaching for me with its many arms. Ready to add my shadow to its collection, as the shadow walker lunged at me. I threw myself to the side, rolling hard across the ground. In the same motion, I hurled the oil lamp straight into the hollow redwood. The glass shattered, and flames exploded to life. What happened next was like a nightmare coming true. The hollow tree was filled with something like black paper, hundreds, maybe thousands of stolen shadows that the creature had stored there over the years. The fire caught them all, and they started to burn. The shadow walker screamed, not with one voice, but with hundreds. All the voices it had stolen, all crying out at once. It tried to save its collection, reaching into the burning tree with its many arms. That's when I saw my chance. But I knew I had to pay a price. I stepped forward and did something that still gives me nightmares. I stuck my right arm into the creature's shadowy form. The cold was worse than anything I'd felt before, like my arm was being dipped in frozen darkness. But it worked. The shadow walker was now connected to me, and to my shadow. Look behind you. I gasped through the pain. It turned. And that's when the rising flames cast our shadows, mine and its, onto the ground. But these shadows were burning. Thanks to the fire, the creature tried to pull away, but it couldn't. It was trapped, connected to my arm, forced to watch as the flames ate through every shadow it had ever stolen. The shadows began to break free, peeling away from the creature like leaves in a wind. I saw the three hikers' shadows slip away first, then others, hundreds of them, each one taking a piece of the shadow walker with them as they escaped. The creature got smaller and smaller as it lost its stolen shadows. Finally, with one last awful sound, like the last breath of winter, it just fell apart, like ashes scattering in the wind. I pulled back my arm, or what was left of it. From that day on, my right arm has never cast a shadow. Small price to pay, I suppose, for sending an ancient evil back to wherever it came from. The hikers were found the next morning, wandering in the forest. They were alive but had no memory of what happened. Others started showing up too, people who had gone missing over the years. They all came back, but like me, none of them cast complete shadows anymore. These days, I'm still the ranger at Redwood Grove. The forest is peaceful again. Birds sing, animals return, and the shadows behave like shadows should. But sometimes, on late evenings when the sun is setting, I look at my shadowless arm and remember. And if you ever visit these woods and think your shadow moves a little strangely, well, maybe it's just the wind in the trees. Or maybe, just maybe, there are some shadows out there still trying to find their way home. My name is Robert Hayes, but everyone here at Yellowstone just calls me Bob. I'm a ranger here, just like my father was, and his father before him. Being part Crow Indian, these mountains are more than just my workplace. They're in my blood, my history. I've seen a lot in my 15 years as a ranger, but the winter of 1968 was different. Something felt wrong from the very start. The forest fires that tore through the park that summer left huge patches of blackened trees, like scars on the land. When winter came, it came hard and fast, like nature was trying to bury those scars under feet of snow. I remember the morning it all began, December 15th. The sun hadn't even risen yet, and the thermometer outside my cabin read -20. I was doing my usual morning patrol when I found it, an elk carcass, half-eaten in a way I'd never seen before. The strange thing wasn't just how it was eaten. It was how the meat looked perfectly preserved, like it was frozen from the inside out. That's weird, I muttered to myself, crouching down to examine it closer. My breath made little clouds in the freezing air. No predator around here feeds like this. The tracks around the carcass made even less sense. They started as normal animal prints, maybe wolf or mountain lion, but then changed. Right there in the snow, they turned into what looked like human footprints. Bare feet at that. Nobody walks barefoot in Yellowstone during winter. That's just asking to lose your toes to frostbite. I radioed back to base. This is Hayes. Found something strange out by Crystal Creek. Might want to send someone to take a look. Copy that. Bob, came Mike Sullivan's voice, crackling through the radio. What kind of strange are we talking about? I hesitated. How do you tell someone something doesn't make sense when you've been tracking animals your whole life? Just strange. You'll see when you get here. That was the first sign. I didn't know it then, but those tracks in the snow were the beginning of something that would change everything I thought I knew about these mountains. Something that would make me question whether the old stories my grandmother used to tell, the ones about hungry spirits and winter demons, were really just stories after all. Later that day, I heard the drums for the first time, distant, deep beats that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The sound made my skin crawl, especially because I knew there shouldn't be anyone up in these mountains. Not with this weather. As I headed back to my cabin that evening, the wind picked up, bringing with it the first flakes of what would become one of the worst blizzards I'd ever seen. But there was something else in that wind, a sound that wasn't quite human and wasn't quite animal. A sound that made me think of my grandmother's warnings about winter spirits and the hunger that comes with the deep snow. I didn't sleep much that night. The wind howled outside my cabin windows. And somewhere in that howling, I could have sworn I heard someone or something calling my name the next morning. The snow had piled up 3 feet high. As I trudged through my patrol route, something caught my eye near the old hiking trail, the one we closed off after the summer fires. The erosion from the melting snow had washed away part of the hillside, exposing something that made my heart skip a beat. No, this can't be right. I whispered to myself. Bones, human bones, sticking out of the dark earth, not just a few, but what looked like an entire burial ground. My grandmother had told me stories about our ancestors being buried in these mountains, but I'd always thought they were just tales. I reached for my radio with shaking hands. Base, this is Hayes. We've got a situation up at Ridge Trail. While waiting for the others to arrive, I noticed something else, markings on the trees nearby. They weren't the usual trail markers or animal scratches. These were symbols, carved deep into the bark, forming patterns I recognized from my grandmother's teachings. Symbols meant to ward off evil spirits. But these weren't here yesterday. I said out loud, touching one of the fresh-looking carvings. The wood was still light-colored where it had been cut. No more than a few hours old. That's when I heard it, a scream echoing through the trees. Not an animal scream, but human. It came from the direction of the winter camping grounds. I ran as fast as I could through the deep snow, my heart pounding. The winter camping area was supposed to have 3 groups of campers, experienced folks who knew what they were doing. But when I got there, I found only empty tents. The camp looked like everyone had just vanished. Coffee cups were still warm. Sleeping bags lay open, covered in a thin layer of fresh snow. And there were those tracks again, the ones that changed from animal to human. But this time, there was something else. Long, deep grooves in the snow, like something had dragged heavy objects away. Hello, I called out, my voice seeming small in the vast whiteness. This is Park Ranger Hayes. Is anyone here? Only the wind answered, whistling through the trees. But in that wind, I heard the drums again, closer this time, much closer. My radio crackled. Hayes, where are you? It was Mike. We've got another problem. 2 more campers just reported seeing strange lights in the forest last night. And they're saying the temperature dropped so low their thermometers couldn't even read it. I looked at the empty campsite one more time and noticed something that made my blood run cold. There was frost forming on the inside of the tents. Not outside, but inside. Like something that radiated extreme cold had been in there. Mike, I said slowly into the radio, I think we need to close the park. Now, as I turned to leave, I saw it, a shadow moving between the trees. Too tall to be human, too thin to be a bear. And for just a second, I could have sworn I saw breath coming from it. Not like normal steam in the cold, but like rolling waves of Arctic air. I knew then that the stories weren't just stories. The Wendigo wasn't just a legend to scare children. It was here, in my park, and it was hungry back at the ranger station. Nobody wanted to believe me. I spread out a map on the table, marking all the strange things I'd found. Look, I said, pointing to the spots where I'd found the frozen elk and the empty campsite. Something's not right here. People don't just disappear without a trace. Mike rubbed his tired eyes. Bob, I know you've got good instincts, but maybe the campers just packed up early because of the weather, with their coffee still warm, leaving all their gear behind. I shook my head. And what about those weird tracks? Just then, Sarah Chun, our newest ranger, burst through the door, her face pale. You guys need to see this. We followed her outside. The snow had stopped, but the cold was worse than ever. Sarah led us to the weather station, where our digital thermometer was going crazy. The numbers kept dropping lower and lower until the screen just showed error messages. It's like something sucking all the heat out of the air. Sarah said, her breath making thick clouds. And listen, we all went quiet. The drums were back. But this time, everyone could hear them. Boom, 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 like a frozen heartbeat in the mountains. There's something else. Sarah whispered, I found these. She held up her phone, showing us pictures of more symbols carved into trees. They were exactly like the ones I'd seen earlier, but these were in a completely different part of the park. They just appeared. She said, I checked this area this morning. These weren't here. My grandmother's voice echoed in my head, telling me about the Wendigo, how it brings eternal winter, how it marks its hunting ground. I had to tell them, there's something hunting in our park. I said slowly, something from the old stories my grandmother used to tell. I know it sounds crazy, but dash, a scream cut through the air, closer than any we'd heard before. We all jumped. This time, it wasn't just a scream. It was a name. My name. Hayes. It sounded like it came from a dozen throats at once. Some human, some not. That's impossible. Mike whispered, sound doesn't carry like that in this weather. We need to find whatever's doing this. I said, checking my rifle before it finds someone else. Sarah nodded, but Mike looked uncertain. Bob, you can't seriously be thinking of hunting this. Whatever it is, I'm not hunting it. I replied, zipping up my heaviest winter coat. I'm tracking it. There's a difference, and I need your help. As we geared up to go out, I noticed frost forming on the inside of the station's windows, just like in the tents. It was getting closer. I took out my grandmother's old medicine pouch from my pocket. Inside was sage, tobacco, and other sacred herbs, just in case. I muttered, tying it to my belt. The sun was setting as we stepped outside, but the darkness seemed to be coming from more than just nightfall. It was like the shadows themselves were getting deeper. Hungrier, we all felt it. Something was watching us from the trees. Something that knew my name. Something that was waiting. The three of us followed the strange tracks through the darkening forest. Our flashlight beams cut through the shadows. But somehow the darkness felt thicker than usual. The cold was getting worse. I could feel it biting through my heavy winter gear. Look there, Sarah whispered, pointing her light at something ahead. We found another elk carcass, frozen solid just like the first one, but this time, there was something different about the tracks around it. They formed a pattern, like whatever made them had been dancing. I need to tell you both something, I said, my voice shaking a little. My grandmother used to tell me about a creature called the Wendigo. It's a spirit that brings winter and makes people disappear. Mike started to say something, but then we heard it, a sound like ice cracking, followed by what sounded like someone crying. This way, I said, moving toward the sound. The crying led us to the entrance of a cave I'd never seen before. Icicles hung from its mouth like teeth, and cold air poured out of it like breath. Hayes, Sarah grabbed my arm. The temperature reader. It's completely dead now. Mike shined his light into the cave. There's something in there. I took a deep breath. We need to go in. Those missing people might be in there. The cave tunnel went down. 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 Ice covered the walls. But not normal ice. This ice had things in it. At first, we saw small animals frozen in the walls. Then we saw something that made us all stop. Oh my God! Sarah whispered. There were people in the ice. Dozens of them. Some looked recent. I recognized 2 of the missing campers. But others were wearing clothes from long ago. Way long ago. Some of these bodies must be hundreds of years old. Mike said, his voice shaking. That's when we heard the drums again, coming from deeper in the cave. But this time, they were mixed with another sound chewing. My radio crackled. Through the static, I heard the voice of Tom Wilson, another ranger who was supposed to be back at the station. Hey, something's here. Help. Then the radio went dead. We have to go back. I said, Tom's in trouble. But as we turned to leave, we heard something moving in the darkness behind us. Something big. The temperature dropped even more, and our flashlights started to flicker. Then we saw it, a tall, thin shape in the darkness. It looked almost human, but wrong, all wrong. Its breath came out like Arctic wind, and its eyes were like holes in the winter sky. Run! I shouted, run! We ran back through the tunnel, but the creature was fast. I could hear it behind us, its feet switching from animal to human steps. Mike tripped, and I turned back to help him. That's when I remember my grandmother's words. The Wendigo can only be stopped by someone who knows the old ways. I reached for the medicine pouch in my belt. I knew what I had to do, but I also knew the price might be higher than I was ready to pay. Everything happened so fast after that. Mike was on the ground, and Sarah was screaming. The Wendigo was getting closer. Its long, bony fingers reaching out. The cold was so bad now that frost was forming on our eyelashes. Get Mike out of here, I yelled to Sarah. I know what to do. My hands were shaking as I opened my grandmother's medicine pouch. I could hear her voice in my head, teaching me the old words, the ritual that could send evil spirits away. But she had also warned me, the price for such things is always high. Little one, I started the ritual, spreading the sacred herbs in a circle around me. The Wendigo stopped, tilting its head like a confused dog. Its eyes, those horrible empty eyes, fixed on me. Hayes! Don't! Sarah called from the cave entrance. Come with us. But I couldn't. I had to finish this. I began to sing the ancient words my grandmother taught me. Each word felt like ice in my mouth. But I kept going. The Wendigo screamed, a sound like winter storms and hungry wolves all mixed together. That's when Tom's voice crackled through my radio again. Bob, help. But it wasn't really Tom anymore. I could hear the Wendigo in his voice now. The creature charged at me, but it couldn't cross the circle of herbs. It raged and howled, its breath turning everything to ice. I kept singing, even as I felt the cold seeping into my bones. Then I heard more screams, human screams, through the swirling snow. I saw 3 shapes on the ground, rangers who had come to help. The Wendigo had gotten them before they could reach me. Their bodies were already covered in frost. My voice was getting weaker, but I couldn't stop. The words had to be finished. The Wendigo thrashed and roared, its form shifting between human and animal and something else entirely. Finally, I spoke the last word. There was a sound like a glacier cracking, and the Wendigo shattered like breaking ice. It fell apart and disappeared into the wind. But grandmother was right about the price. I couldn't move. The cold had gone so deep inside me that I was frozen solid. But somehow, I was still alive, still breathing. They found me like that, a human ice statue, standing in a circle of herbs. They took me to the hospital, but no matter what they did, they couldn't warm me up. I stayed cold, my body temperature never rising above room temperature. That was 5 years ago. I still work as a ranger at Yellowstone. But things are different now. I don't need winter clothes anymore. I don't feel the cold. Can't feel it. Because I am the cold. Sometimes, on winter nights when the wind howls, I think I hear drums in the distance. And sometimes, I wonder if I really destroyed the Wendigo that night. Or if part of it is still here, living inside me. But at least the disappearances have stopped. The people of Yellowstone are safe now, even if their ranger feels like winter itself. And every year, when the first snow falls, I leave a small offering at the cave entrance, a pinch of sacred herbs from my grandmother's pouch, just to be sure, because up here in the mountains, the old stories are more than just stories. And winter is hungry. My name is David Mitchell, and I've seen things that no human being should ever have to witness. Before I tell you what happened during that blood moon in the Ozarks, you should know that I wasn't always the blind man sitting here today. Back then, I was a 28-year-old park ranger, still trying to shake off the shadows of Vietnam, where I flew helicopters through nights darker than you can imagine. The story I'm about to tell you happened in the fall of 1976. I was working in the Ozark Mountains of Arkansas, where the trees grow so thick they can make noon look like dusk. Most days, I enjoyed the solitude. The quiet helped with my jumpy nerves, what the doctors called PTSD. But that October, something changed in my mountains. It started with the animals. First, the deer stopped coming to their usual watering holes. Then the birds went quiet. And if you know anything about forests, you know that's never a good sign. But what really got my attention were the lights. Every night for weeks, strange blue flickers danced between the trees, like fireflies that had grown too big. I remember the morning I found the first dead cow. It wasn't like normal animal attacks I'd seen before. The poor thing was laid out in a perfect circle, its organs removed as clean as if a surgeon had done it. Around it, someone or something had arranged pine branches in a pattern that made my head hurt just looking at it. Just teenagers playing pranks. My boss said when I reported it, but I knew better. I'd seen enough death in Vietnam to know when something wasn't right. Plus, there were those Native American burial mounds we'd discovered a few weeks back. The local tribes had been upset about that, saying we were disturbing sacred ground. They warned us about ancient guardians and curses. But like most modern folks, we didn't listen. That night, I couldn't sleep. The full moon was coming. But not just any full moon, a blood moon eclipse, the first in decades. According to the papers, as I lay in my cabin, the wind carried something strange through my open window, the sound of a flute playing somewhere deep in the woods. The melody was unlike anything I'd ever heard, both beautiful and wrong in a way that made my skin crawl. I grabbed my flashlight and ranger jacket, not knowing that would be the last night I'd see the world through my own eyes, not knowing that everything I thought I knew about reality was about to change forever. But that's how these things go, right? The worst nights of our lives always start just like any other. The moon was rising, already taking on a reddish tinge. As I stepped into the darkness of the Ozark forest, I should have known better. I should have waited for backup. But something was calling me into those woods. And after Vietnam, I thought I could handle anything. I was wrong. So terribly wrong, the deeper I walked into the woods that night, the more my old military instincts kicked in. Something was watching me. I could feel it. The beam of my flashlight caught movement in the trees. But whenever I turned to look directly, there was nothing there. Just shadows dancing in the moonlight. I followed the flute music, which seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. The sound led me to a clearing I'd never seen before. Even though I thought I knew these woods like the back of my hand, that's when I found them more dead cattle. 5 of them, arranged in a star pattern. The sight made my hands shake, reminding me of things I'd seen in Vietnam. Control. This is Mitchell. I spoke into my radio. I'm going to need backup out here. Only static answered me. The radio was dead. Even though I'd checked the batteries before leaving, a twig snapped behind me. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. For a split second, I saw something that made my blood run cold. 2 glowing red eyes, floating about 7 feet off the ground. They disappeared before I could get a good look at what they belonged to. My heart was pounding now, just like it used to in the war. I took deep breaths, trying to stay calm. Focus. David, I whispered to myself. Focus. The moon above was getting redder by the minute, casting everything in a strange, bloody light. I heard voices calling my name. Relief washed over me as I saw flashlight beams approaching. It was the search party I'd requested earlier in the day. Tom from the police station, Sarah the local vet, and Mike, another ranger. They looked as worried as I felt. David, what in God's name is going on out here? Sarah asked, her face pale as she looked at the dead cattle. I wish I knew. I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. But whatever did this isn't natural. Look at how precise these cuts are. Mike walked the perimeter of the star pattern, shining his light on something carved into the ground. Guys, you need to see this. We gathered around what looked like ancient symbols etched into the dirt. Sarah, who knew a bit about Native American history, went quiet when she saw them. These are warning signs. She whispered, the elders at the reservation talked about them. They mark forbidden ground. That's when we heard it. A howl that didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard before. It was deep and somehow human-like, as if someone had mixed a wolf's cry with a person's scream. The sound echoed through the trees, making all of us freeze in place. Our flashlights started flickering, and the air turned cold enough to see our breath. Tom's light went out first, then Sarah's, then Mike's. Mine was the last to die, leaving us in the blood-red glow of the eclipse. Everyone stay close, I ordered, falling back into my military training. But as I reached out to gather the group together, I realized something terrible. We weren't alone in that clearing anymore. I and the red moonlight. I could barely make out my friends' faces. The cold air made it hard to breathe, and that awful howl kept getting closer. Tom was the first to break. We need to get out of here. Now, he shouted, turning to run. But before any of us could stop him, he disappeared into the darkness. We heard him scream. Then nothing but silence. Tom, Sarah called out, her voice shaking. Tom, where are you? Mike grabbed her arm. Don't shout. Whatever's out there will hear us. I knew we had to move. Standing still would make us easy targets. Follow me. I whispered, I know these woods. There's an old ranger station about half a mile from here. We started walking, staying close together. The moon cast strange shadows that seemed to move on their own. That's when I saw it again, those red eyes in the darkness. But this time, I could see more. It looked like a massive black dog, bigger than any I'd ever seen, but something was wrong about its shape, like it couldn't decide what it wanted to be. Don't look directly at it. I warned the others. Something in my gut told me those eyes were dangerous. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. David, it's changing. She was right. The creature's form shifted like smoke, sometimes looking like a dog, sometimes like a man, sometimes like something I can't even describe. My head started to hurt just watching it. Mike pulled out his gun, but his hands were shaking so bad I knew he'd never hit anything. What is that thing? The flute music started again, coming from somewhere behind us. It made me feel dizzy, like I was in a dream. Sarah grabbed my arm tight. The elders, she said, her voice barely a whisper. They warned about this. The Ozark Howler. They said it guards the burial grounds, that it feeds on fear, and before she could finish, the creature moved. It was so fast. None of us had time to react. One moment Mike was beside us. The next he was gone, just gone. Like he'd never been there at all. Sarah started crying, and I knew I had to keep her focused. We can't stop. The station's just ahead. But as we ran, the trees around us seemed to change. Paths I'd walked 100 times led to places I'd never seen before. It was like the forest itself was moving, trying to trap us. The creature was toying with us. I could feel it every time we thought we were getting somewhere. Those red eyes would appear again, herding us like sheep, leading us somewhere. Then we saw it, the stone circle. Ancient rocks arranged in a pattern that matched the one made by the dead cattle. And in the center, something was glowing with a light that seemed to come from deep underground. Sarah's grip on my arm tightened. David, she whispered, I think I know what it wants. But before she could tell me, the world around us exploded into chaos. Everything happened so fast. The ground beneath our feet started shaking, and that awful flute music grew louder than ever. Sarah screamed as the dirt around the stone circle began to crack open. David, look! She pointed at the glowing light. It was pouring out of the cracks like liquid moonlight, forming patterns in the air that reminded me of the symbols we'd seen earlier. My head was pounding now. The more I looked at those lights, the harder it became to think straight. That's when Sarah grabbed my shoulders, forcing me to look at her instead. The elders told me stories, she said quickly, her words tumbling out. This thing, the Howler, it's not just a monster. It's a guardian. These burial grounds hold something ancient, something that was never meant to be disturbed. The creature appeared again, this time standing right at the edge of the stone circle, its red eyes fixed on us. And I felt a pull in my mind, like it was trying to drag my thoughts right out of my head. Don't look at its eyes, Sarah shouted, but it was too late. She was already turning towards it, her face going blank, like she was in a trance. She started walking towards the creature. Sarah, stop! I grabbed her arm, but she shook me off like I wasn't even there. The Howler's form shifted again, and now it looked almost beautiful, like it was made of starlight and shadows. That's when I remembered something from Vietnam, how we used to close our eyes when the helicopter lights got too bright during night missions. Without thinking, I pulled my jacket off and tied it around my eyes like a blindfold. The pulling sensation in my mind stopped immediately. I could still hear everything. Sarah's footsteps, the creature's breathing, that haunting flute music, but without seeing those hypnotic eyes. My head started to clear. Sarah, it's controlling you. I shouted, it's not real. Whatever you're seeing, it's not real. But her voice, when she answered, wasn't her own anymore. We tried to warn you, she said in a tone that sounded ancient and echoing. The sacred places must remain sealed. The old ones must stay buried. The ground shook harder. I could feel heat coming from the cracks. And a smell like old bones and dried flowers filled the air. The howler was doing something to Sarah, using her somehow. I had to make a choice. I could run, maybe even survive, or I could try to save my friend and stop whatever was happening here. The blood moon above was reaching its peak. Somehow, I knew we were running out of time, with my eyes still covered. I took a step toward where I'd last heard Sarah's voice. "All right," I said to the darkness. "You want to show me what this is really about? Show me." The howler's howl shook the whole forest, and I felt its presence move closer. What happened next would change my life forever. The howler's breath was hot on my face now, even blindfolded. I could feel those red eyes burning into me. My military training kept telling me to run. But I stood my ground. "Let her go," I said firmly, talking about Sarah. "Whatever message you need to send, whatever you're protecting, use me instead." The flute music stopped suddenly. In the silence, I heard Sarah collapse to the ground. The creature made a sound, not quite a growl, not quite words, but somehow I understood what it wanted. "You want me to see?" I reached for my blindfold. "Fine, I'll see." As I untied my jacket from around my eyes, Sarah's weak voice called out, "David, don't." But I had to. Sometimes the only way to face your fears is to look them right in the eye. The moment I opened my eyes, the world exploded into visions. I saw everything. The ancient people who first buried their dead here. The sacred objects they'd hidden deep underground. The guardian they'd created to protect it all. The pain was unbearable. It felt like my eyes were burning right out of my skull. But through the pain, I understood. We hadn't just disturbed a burial ground. We'd almost broken an ancient seal that kept something dangerous locked away. I understand now. I gasped through the pain. We'll leave this place. We'll make sure no one else disturbs it. The howler's form shifted one last time. Through my burning eyes, I saw it become something beautiful and terrible, like starlight given form. It reached out and touched my forehead with what felt like a cold flame. Images flashed through my mind. The construction plans for this area. The roads they wanted to build. The buildings they wanted to put up. The howler was showing me what would happen if we didn't stop it. "I'll protect it," I promised. "I'll make sure they never build here. Just please, let us live." The creature stepped back. The blood moon reached its peak overhead. And everything went dark. Not just dark. My eyes had given their last. But in that darkness, I heard Sarah getting up. Heard the ground closing back up. Felt the ancient power fading away. We made it out of those woods somehow. They found Tom and Mike later, alive but with no memory of what happened. The construction plans mysteriously disappeared, and the area was declared a protected historic site. Me, I never saw anything with my eyes again after that night. The doctors couldn't explain what happened to them, but sometimes, in my dreams, I still see those ancient visions, and I know that deep in the Ozark Mountains, something still guards the old places, watching with eyes that glow like blood in the darkness. Even now, years later, when people ask me if I regret looking into those eyes, I tell them the same thing. Sometimes the price of protecting something important is high, but some things are worth going blind for. Now, when I hear folks planning to explore those old burial grounds, I tell them this story. Most don't believe me, of course, but every now and then, on nights when the moon turns red, I hear that flute music again, and I know the howler is still out there, still watching, still protecting its ancient secrets. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly how it should be. My name is Bill Foster, and I've spent most of my life underground. For 23 years. I worked as a coal miner until that terrible accident took my brother Tom from me. Now, at 45, I work as a cave rescue specialist at Mammoth Cave in Kentucky. People say I know these tunnels better than anyone else. And maybe they're right, but what I found in those caves last summer, well, let me start from the beginning. It was the wettest season anyone could remember. The rain hadn't stopped for weeks, and the cave system was flooding in places we'd never seen water before. That's when things started getting strange. First, it was just little things, odd echoes that didn't sound quite right, fresh scratch marks where there shouldn't be any, and that constant feeling of being watched. I remember that Tuesday morning clearly. The air was heavy with moisture as I did my regular inspection of the tourist areas. That's when Jerry, one of our junior rangers, came running up to me, out of breath and pale as a ghost. Bill, he gasped, you need to see this. The flood, it opened up a new passage. Now, finding new passages isn't unusual in Mammoth Cave. It's the longest cave system in the world. After all, but something in Jerry's voice made my skin crawl. 20 years of cave rescue work teaches you to trust your gut. And right then, my gut was screaming that something was wrong. I grabbed my gear, helmet, lights, rope, an emergency radio, and followed Jerry deeper into the cave. The beam of my headlamp cut through the darkness as we walked past the regular tourist spots and into the restricted areas. The sound of dripping water echoed off the limestone walls, and our footsteps crunched on the rocky ground. It's just ahead, Jerry whispered, though I couldn't figure out why he was whispering. We were the only ones down here, or at least. That's what I thought at the time. When we reached the new passage, I immediately noticed something different. The limestone walls, usually smooth from thousands of years of water flow, were covered in something I'd never seen before in all my years underground cave paintings. But these weren't the usual Native American drawings we sometimes found. These showed something else, something that made my blood run cold. The crude figures on the wall showed human-like creatures, but they weren't quite human. They had long, twisted limbs and what looked like bat wings, and the paint, it didn't look centuries old. In fact, some of it still looked wet. That's when we heard it. A sound that didn't belong in any cave I'd ever been in. It was like echolocation, like what bats use, but much deeper and much louder. Jerry grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my sleeve. Bill, he whispered, please tell me that was just water dripping. I wished I could tell him that. But after spending most of my life in caves, I knew better. Something was down here with us. Something that shouldn't exist. And as I stood there, staring at those cave paintings, I had no idea that this was just the beginning of the most terrifying week of my life. That as Jerry and I stood there, frozen in place. My flashlight beam caught something else on the cave floor. Fresh claw marks. Not old scratches in the rock, but new ones that had torn right through solid limestone. Whatever made these marks was strong. Really strong. We need to document this, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, take some photos and report it to headquarters. But just as I reached for my camera, my radio crackled to life. Bill, come in. Bill, it was Sarah from the visitor center. And she sounded worried. We've got missing hikers. A family of 4 hasn't returned from the guided tour. My heart sank. In all my years as a rescue specialist, I learned that time is precious when people go missing in caves. The darkness, the cold, the confusion, they can all kill. Where were they last seen? I asked, already mentally mapping out the search areas. Near Echo River. But Bill, the guide says they heard strange noises, and the family went to investigate. They never came back. Jerry looked at me, his face pale in the flashlight beam. Echo River was close to where we were. Maybe too close. I made a quick decision. Jerry, go back up and get the rescue team ready. I'll start searching from here. Alone? But what about? He glanced at the cave paintings. I've been doing this for 20 years. Kid, I'll be fine. I tried to sound more confident than I felt. After Jerry left, I moved deeper into the cave. Following the sound of running water, the flood had changed familiar passages, making them harder to navigate. Water dripped from the ceiling, each drop echoing like footsteps. That's when I found something that made me question everything I knew about these caves. In a small chamber, barely visible in my flashlight beam, was what looked like a camp, but not a modern one. There were strange tools made from bone and rock, scraps of what looked like bat leather, and worst of all, fresh food remains. Someone or something was living down here. As I examined the camp, I heard that sound again, the deep, pulsing echolocation, but this time it was closer, much closer. The sound seemed to bounce off every wall, making it impossible to tell where it was coming from. My headlamp started to flicker, and the batteries in my backup flashlight were getting weak. Then I saw them, two reflective eyes in the darkness, watching me. They were too big to be a bat's, too intelligent to be any cave creature I knew. When I moved, they moved. When I stopped, they stopped. My radio crackled again, making me jump. But before I could answer it, I heard something that turned my blood to ice, a child's voice, echoing through the caves. Hello? Is anyone there? We can't find our way back. The voice came from deeper in the cave, past those watching eyes, and I knew, with a certainty that came from years of cave rescue experience, that I had to make a choice, retreat to safety and wait for backup, or follow that voice into the darkness. The eyes in the darkness blinked, and somehow, I felt like whatever was watching me was waiting to see what I would choose. I took a deep breath and made my choice. Those kids needed help, and waiting wasn't an option. I clicked my radio twice to mark my position, an old cave rescue trick, and moved forward, trying to ignore those watching eyes. This is Bill Foster. Cave Rescue. I called out. Keep talking so I can find you. The child's voice came again, but something was off about it. It seemed to come from different directions, like it was moving. 20 years of cave experience told me this wasn't normal. My flashlight beam caught movement ahead, just a quick shadow. But it was huge, whatever it was. It moved across the cave wall like a spider, quick and smooth. My hands started shaking, but I kept moving forward. Hello. This time it was a woman's voice, but it sounded wrong, like someone trying to copy human speech. It reminded me of when my nephew tries to copy words he doesn't understand. The passage narrowed, and the water was getting deeper. The flood had turned this section into a small stream, making the rock slippery. I had to watch every step. That's when my radio crackled to life. Bill, it was Jerry. The rescue team is ready. We're coming down. Before I could answer, I heard a splash behind me. I spun around, my light catching something that made my heart stop. There, half hidden in the water, was a creature I'd never seen before. It looked almost human, but its skin was pale white, like it had never seen the sun. Its arms and legs were too long, bent in ways that human limbs shouldn't bend. And its face had no eyes, just smooth skin with what looked like sonar organs. Like a bat's. The creature tilted its head, studying me. Then it opened its mouth, and out came the child's voice I'd been following. Hello? Is anyone there? I stood frozen. My light trained on the creature. It didn't attack. Instead, it seemed curious, like it was trying to understand me. That's when I realized it had been learning from us, copying our voices to lure people deeper into its territory. The radio buzzed again. Bill, what's your position? The creature's head snapped toward the sound of the radio. In that split second, I saw more movement in the darkness behind it, more pale shapes moving in the shadows, more eyes that weren't eyes. There wasn't just one of them. There was a whole colony. My flashlight started flickering again, and I could hear the rescue team's voices echoing from far behind me. I had to make another choice. Try to save the missing family, if they were still alive, or warn the rescue team about what they were walking into. The creature in front of me smiled, a horrible copy of a human smile, and spoke again, this time in my own voice. 20 years of cave experience, I backed away slowly, keeping my light on the creature. Years of cave training kicked in. I needed to stay calm and think. These things could mimic voices, which meant the family might already be. I couldn't finish that thought. All rescue team members, stop where you are. I whispered into my radio. Do not proceed further. I repeat, do not proceed. The creature in front of me tilted its head again. Listening, behind it, I could hear more splashing. The others were getting closer. My light caught glimpses of their pale bodies, climbing along the walls and ceiling. Bill, what's wrong? Jerry's voice came through the radio. We can see your light ahead. That's when I remembered something crucial. The flood control system. After the heavy rains, the lower caverns had emergency floodgates that could be opened to prevent the tourist areas from flooding. And I was standing right next to the manual release lever. But before I could reach for it, one of the creatures dropped from the ceiling, landing between me and the lever. Up close, I could see how its hands had evolved into sharp claws, the same claws that had left those marks in the limestone. Bill, we can see your light ahead. This time the words came from the creature's mouth. Copying Jerry's voice perfectly, more of them emerged from the darkness. They moved like a pack of hunters, surrounding me. My back was against the cave wall now, and my light was getting dimmer by the second. Then I heard something that gave me hope. Real human voices echoing from a side passage. Help! Someone please help us. It wasn't the creatures this time. It was the missing family. I had seconds to make a decision. The creatures were closing in. The rescue team was coming. And somewhere in these caves was a family that needed help. What happened next would haunt me forever. I lunged for the flood lever, but one of the creatures was faster. Its claws caught my leg, tearing through my pants and into flesh. I screamed in pain but managed to grab the lever. The creature pulled me back, its face inches from mine. Please help us. It whispered in a child's voice. But this time, I could hear the hunger behind the words. With all my strength, I kicked out with my good leg and pulled the lever down hard. The sound of rushing water filled the cave. And that's when true chaos broke loose. The floodgates opened with a deafening roar. Water rushed in like a tidal wave, filling the lower passages. The creatures screeched, a sound that was nothing like their human mimicry, and scattered in panic. This way, I shouted towards the family's voices, ignoring the burning pain in my leg. Follow my voice. Get to higher ground, through the chaos. I saw them, a mother, father, and 2 kids, huddled in a high passage. They were cold and scared, but alive. The rushing water had created a path between us, keeping the creatures at bay. When I say run, run towards my light. I yelled over the roaring water. The creatures were climbing the walls, trying to escape the flood. Some were already disappearing into hidden cracks in the rock. Escape routes I never knew existed. The water was rising fast. It was now or never. Run! The family splashed through the water towards me. I shined my light on the path to the upper levels, where I could hear the rescue team getting closer. Just as the youngest child reached me, my injured leg gave out. I fell hard onto the rocks. The father turned back to help me, but I could see more pale shapes moving in the darkness behind him. Go! I shouted, pushing myself up. I'm right behind you. I wasn't sure if I could make it. The water was chest deep now, and my leg felt like it was on fire. That's when I felt hands grab me. Human hands this time. The rescue team had arrived. We've got you. Bill. Jerry's voice, his real voice, was the best thing I'd ever heard. They pulled me up just as one last creature lunged from the water, in the beam of multiple flashlights. We all saw it clearly. It screamed in frustration, using all our voices at once. Before the flood swept it away, the family made it out safely. My leg was badly hurt, broken in 2 places. While I was recovering in the hospital, they sealed off the new passages. The official report said it was because of flood damage. But sometimes, on quiet nights when I'm doing my rounds in the upper caves, I still hear them, voices calling from deep below, mimicking visitors, rangers, and even me, and I know they're still down there, waiting in the darkness. The cave system is vast, and we've only explored a small part of it. The creatures survived the flood. I'm sure of it. They've probably been down there for thousands of years, evolving, learning, hunting. Last week, I found fresh claw marks near a newly discovered passage. I reported it as normal wear and tear. Some things I've learned are better left alone, but I've made sure the flood control system is always ready, just in case, because in Mammoth Cave, you never know what's hiding in the dark. Listening, learning, and waiting to use your own voice against you. My name is James Cooper, and after 30 years of serving as a ranger in Olympic National Park, I thought I'd seen everything these ancient forests could throw at me. I was wrong, dead wrong. I remember that autumn of '92 like it was yesterday. It was supposed to be my last season before retirement, just a few more months of routine patrols, helping lost hikers, and filing paperwork. At 52, I was ready to hang up my ranger hat and maybe write that book my wife had been pestering me about. The first signs that something was off came with the snow. It was only October, but thick. Heavy flakes were falling in clumps, coating the evergreens in a way I'd never seen before. The weather folks couldn't explain it. Neither could I. But 20 years in the Marines had taught me to trust my gut. And my gut was screaming that something wasn't right. I was doing my usual morning rounds when I found the first totem pole. I'd passed by the spot hundreds of times before. It was an old cedar pole, probably a century old, carved with the faces of tribal ancestors. But that morning, it was lying on the ground, split clean in half, not by rot, not by wind, but by something strong enough to snap solid cedar like a matchstick. The wolves were the next to vanish. Our timber wolf packs, the ones we'd tracked for years, just disappeared. No bodies, no tracks leading away. They were just gone, like something had scared them off. Wolves don't scare easy. I should know. I'd tracked enough of them in my time. Then came the voices. It started one night when I was alone in my cabin. A sound like someone calling my name, but not quite human. Like when you hear a parrot mimic speech. The words are there, but something's off about them. I grabbed my rifle and went to check, but found nothing. Just those massive footprints in the fresh snow, each one bigger than both my boots put together. I radioed it in. Of course. But what was I supposed to say? That something was out there. Something that could break ancient totems, frighten away wolf packs, and mimic human voices? They'd think old Cooper had finally lost his marbles. So I kept most of it to myself. But I started carrying my old Marine Scout rifle again. Some habits die hard, and survival instincts die harder. Little did I know, those footprints were just the beginning. What happened next would make me question everything I thought I knew about these woods, about nature itself, and about the thin line between reality and legend. And it all started with that damn storm. The storm hit us like nothing I'd ever seen before. The sky turned an ugly green-black, and the wind howled through the trees like a wounded animal. But something was weird about the storm. It seemed to follow me whenever I moved to a new area for patrol. The worst of the weather followed. At first, I thought I was imagining things. I was alone in my patrol truck, driving up the mountain road when my radio crackled to life. Through the static, I heard Tom from the station. Cooper, static, massive seismic activity, static. Trees down everywhere. I pulled over and grabbed my flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, showing me something that made my blood run cold. The trees ahead weren't just fallen. They were twisted. Huge pines, thick as cars, were bent and broken at heights where no normal animal could reach. Some were snapped clean in half. 40 feet up in the air that night, I set up my old Marine surveillance gear near the damaged trees. The wind died down, but the silence that followed was worse. No crickets, no owls, nothing, just dead quiet, like the whole forest was holding its breath. Around midnight, I heard it, footsteps, but not normal ones. Each step made the ground shake slightly, like tiny earthquakes. Then came the smell of strong, musty odor that reminded me of wet dog mixed with something else. Something ancient. I switched on my night vision scope, scanning the tree line. What I saw through those green-tinted lenses still haunts me. Two eyes, reflecting my light, set about 9 feet off the ground. They weren't animal eyes. There was intelligence there, the kind of intelligence that sends chills down your spine. Then it moved. A shadow darker than the night itself shifted between the trees. The movement was smooth, too smooth for something that big. Whatever it was, it knew these woods better than I did, and it was watching me. I sat there, perfectly still, my hand on my rifle. 20 years of Marine training told me to take the shot. But something else, something deeper, told me that would be the biggest mistake of my life. The creature disappeared into the darkness, but it left me a message. Next morning, I found a half-eaten elk carcass near my truck. But here's the thing, it wasn't torn apart like a predator would do. The bones were carefully arranged in a pattern. A warning, a message, I didn't know. But one thing was clear, this thing wasn't just big. It was smart. I called in sick that day. First time in 15 years. I needed time to think, to plan. But as I sat in my cabin, looking at photos of the twisted trees and those strange bone arrangements, I realized something that made my skin crawl. This creature wasn't just passing through. It was marking its territory, and I was in it that I couldn't keep this to myself anymore. After 3 more elk carcasses showed up, each arranged more deliberately than the last, I called in the search party. 5 of us gathered at the ranger station, me, Tom from dispatch, 2 local hunters named Mike and Steve, and Sarah, our wildlife expert. Look, I know this sounds crazy. I told them, spreading out the photos on the table, but something's out there, something big. And it's not like anything we've dealt with before. Sarah picked up a photo of the footprints. Her face went pale. "These are fresh?" she asked. When I nodded, She pulled out her tablet. Cooper, these prints are twice the size of a grizzly's. As we planned our search, weird things started happening in the room. The lights flickered. The temperature dropped. Even our phones went dead all at once. That's when Mike spoke up. My grandfather used to tell stories. He said quietly about an ancient creature in these mountains. The elders called it the Guardian. They said it could control the weather, the animals, even people's minds. I usually don't believe in such stories. But after what I'd seen, we headed out at dawn, armed with Trent guns and my rifle, just in case. The forest felt different that day. The trees seemed to lean in, watching us. Birds would suddenly go quiet as we passed. Even the air felt heavy, like right before a big storm. We followed the tracks up the mountain. They led us to a cave system I'd never seen before. And I thought I knew every inch of this park. The entrance was huge, with claw marks scratched deep into the rock. That's when things got worse. First, we lost the radio signals. Then our compasses started spinning wildly. Sarah said it was probably magnetic interference from the rocks. But I'd never seen anything like it. We were about to enter the cave when we heard it. A sound that made us all freeze. It was like a deep rumble, but it formed words. Words that sounded like they were coming from inside our own heads. Leave. Just one word. But it felt like it shook the whole mountain. Mike panicked. He turned to run, but stopped suddenly, staring at something behind us. We all turned around slowly. There, standing between the trees, was a pack of wolves, our missing timber wolves. But something was wrong with them. Their eyes looked glazed over, and they moved in perfect unison, like they were being controlled by something. That's when we realized we weren't the hunters here. We were being hunted. Everything happened so fast. The wolves moved like they were one animal, not a pack. Mike and Steve ran left. Sarah and Tom went right. I stood my ground, my old Marine training kicking in. But these weren't normal wolves. Their movements were too perfect, too planned. Get to the trees. I shouted, but it was too late. I heard Steve scream first, through the fog. I saw him go down under two wolves. Tom tried to help him, but got caught by three more. Sarah managed to climb a tree, but she was trapped up there. Mike just disappeared into the mist. I never saw him again. I fired my rifle into the air, trying to scare them off. The wolves didn't even flinch. Normal wolves would run from gunshots, but these just kept coming. Their eyes were empty, like they were in some kind of trance. The Guardian appears. That's when I felt it, a presence so powerful it made my knees weak. The air got thick and cold. The fog swirled around me like it was alive. And through it all, I heard that voice again, deeper than thunder. Protect. Must protect. Then I saw it, the elder Sasquatch. It stepped out of the fog, and everything I thought I knew about nature changed forever. It was huge, bigger than any bear I'd ever seen. But it wasn't just big, it was ancient. Its eyes held a wisdom that made me feel like a child. The creature's fur was silver gray, like old tree bark. Steam rose from its body in the cold air. But what really got me were its eyes. They glowed with a blue light, like they held lightning inside them. I raised my rifle, more from habit than courage. The creature didn't move. Instead, it did something I'll never forget. It pointed deeper into the cave. That's when I understood. It wasn't just attacking us for no reason. It was protecting something through the cave entrance. I caught a glimpse of movement. Another figure, larger but moving slowly. The elder's mate. And she was pregnant. All the pieces fell into place. The territorial marking. The control wolves. The warnings. This wasn't just about territory. This was about family. I lowered my rifle slowly. The elder watched me, those glowing eyes studying every move. In that moment, I made a decision that would change everything. I took a step backward. Cooper, Sarah called from her tree. What are you doing? We're leaving. I said firmly, this isn't our fight. The elder tilted its head. Those ancient eyes still locked on mine. The wolves stopped moving. Frozen in place like statues, we were being given a chance to walk away. But would it let us? I knew we had only seconds to make our escape. Sarah, I called out, keeping my voice steady. When I count to 3, climb down and run to my right. Don't look back. The elder Sasquatch stood like a mountain, watching us. The wolves were still frozen, waiting for its command. One wrong move, and we'd both be dead. 1, 2, 3. Sarah scrambled down the tree. As she ran, the elder let out a roar that shook the ground. The wolves twitched, ready to chase. But I had one last card to play. From my pocket, I pulled out something I'd been saving, a flare. The kind that burns bright enough to light up a mountain. I struck it, and red light exploded in the darkness. The elder raised its massive arm to shield its eyes. The wolves whimpered and backed away. Run! I shouted to Sarah. We sprinted through the trees, jumping over fallen logs, crashing through bushes. Behind us, I could hear the thunder of huge footsteps. The elder was following. We were almost at my truck when I realized this would never end. As long as we knew about them, they wouldn't be safe. The elder and its family would always be in danger from humans. I stopped running. Cooper, come on. Sarah screamed. Get to the truck. I said, I'll handle this. The elder emerged from the trees, its blue eyes glowing brighter than ever. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my ranger badge, the symbol of everything I'd worked for all these years. I placed it on a rock, then took out my rifle. The elder tensed, but instead of aiming, I unloaded it. The bullets fell to the ground one by one. I understand. I said quietly, you're protecting your family. I'm done here. This is your territory. The elder stood still for a long moment. Then it did something amazing. It nodded, just once. But it was clear as day. I backed away slowly, then turned and ran to the truck where Sarah was waiting. I retired the next week, moved to Seattle, far from the Olympic Forest. The official report said we were attacked by wolves. Tom and Steve's families got their compensation. Mike was never found. Sarah kept quiet about what we saw. She understood, just like I did, that some secrets need to stay secret. But the story doesn't end there. Every few months, I find something on my porch, a freshly killed elk, arranged carefully, like a gift, or maybe a reminder. Sometimes, on cold nights, I hear that deep voice in my dreams. Protect. Must protect. And I understand now, better than ever, that there are things in this world beyond our understanding. Things that deserve to be left alone, to protect their own, just like we protect ours. The elder Sasquatch is still out there, watching over its territory, keeping its secrets, and sometimes that's exactly how things should be. As for me, I've learned that the best stories are the ones we never tell, but I still keep my rifle unloaded, just in case.